You're watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi. Welcome from Washington, D.C., Professor Prashant Yadav. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development, a professor at INSEAD, and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School as well. Professor Yadav, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on your show, Amitabh, and an important topic to discuss.
Absolutely. A pleasure is all ours. Also from Durham in North Carolina is Dr. Jonathan D. Quick. He's the MD of the Pandemic Response, Preparedness, and Prevention at the Rockefeller Foundation. He's an author of a very prescient book, The End of Epidemics in 2018, and Adjunct Professor at Duke Global Health Institute. Dr. Quick, thank you for your time on StratNews Global.
Good to be with you, Amitabh.
Dr. Quick, the movement that came in after the U.S. Trade Representative announced the Biden government's position at the WTO in terms of TRIPS waivers for vaccines. Now, that is obviously a welcome step. Did you see it as a surprise, or did you expect it?
Well, these sort of discussions are always open to last-minute decisions, as it were, or considerable consideration. So I think the decision was different than what some of the previous U.S. administrations have taken. But I think the key thing, the absolute key thing, is that we need to scale up production of COVID-19 vaccines and really maximize the capacity that countries like India have. I mean, you have world-class vaccine production and pharmaceutical production. So I think anything that takes us closer to that it will be a major step in combating this incredibly gruesome pandemic.
Absolutely agree with you, Professor Yadav. It will take us a step closer, theoretically. But how long will it really take? We do know WTO takes months and sometimes even years, even though there has been a lot of support. I think it's about 120 of the 164 countries that expressed support.
So two things, Amitabh. The first is that the proposal has not passed yet. I think it's important to keep in mind that the United States is supporting it, which is unprecedented and has not happened in the past. But at the same time, many other member countries, such as the member states of the European Union, Japan, many other countries still have to decide whether they are also supporting, not supporting. And I think that will evolve over the next few weeks. Embedded within that is the idea that maybe we can find something that brings everybody closer to a solution if in case there are countries which are not necessarily agreeing with the current format of the proposal in its fullest. Once that happens, there will be some legal paperwork and other things that need to be put in place. But I think the more important time step that we need to keep in mind is from having a patent waiver till the time it will start realizing into produced output coming out of a factory may still be 6 months or longer. And the reasons are very many, but we can go into details of that. But I think we have to be clear in the expectations of how quickly can this lead to any direct output impact.
Dr. Quick, if you could take that in terms, that's the same question that I'm raising again in terms of legally countries or companies may not fall into the copyright law if that waiver happens. Now, like Professor Yadav is pointing out, that could take months. But the legal case is separate from actually getting technology or transfer of technology to allow that to happen. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes, and so I think for that reason, trying to find a pathway that would maybe how should we say? I think the goal needs to be, we've got to have, in the case of pandemic emergencies, we basically got to have a innovation sharing agreements, and the legal process can take a while, but the sort of cooperative agreements, for example, the agreement that the Serum Institute of India has with AstraZeneca, that's been a fabulous, and the key thing is you've got a dynamic there where the two partners have agreed to work together, willing partners important, sharing technology, sharing information about new variants, how do you adapt the vaccines? I think we have to realize vaccines in the context of COVID are a different entity. So what would be really great if in parallel to whatever happens at WTO, we have real conversations about contract production. You have you have world-class vaccine production there, and I think seeing if we can broker conversations. I mean, if J&J can contract out to Merck, if they're qualified production companies already, let's get that technology transfer, positive dynamic, and really scale up. Because right now, we're on a trajectory to two realities, the way we're going. And by that, I mean, Europe and North America are going to be, the rich countries by the early next year are going to be vaccinated and working back to some new normal. At the current rate, it'll be several years before the low and middle income countries like India get adequately vaccinated. That is it's unacceptable morally, but it's also a continuing risk for new variants, and we're going to lose trillions in economic recovery by prolonging the epidemic. The point being, getting a innovation sharing arrangements that work for originators and for subsequent producers. I think we need to pursue that path. In pandemics, one of the principles is it's rarely either or, it's and both, and we need both of those dynamics.
Professor Yadav, Angela Merkel has expressed her or Germany's probably not complete support to what the US is doing. Pharma companies, obviously, the big pharma has also been lobbying against that. Innovation, when Dr. Quick mentions that, now we are told as lay people that for innovation to happen, especially in such high tech and such life-saving necessity, you need copyrights and intellectual property rights like this. How does the big pharma argument fall in this case?
Yeah, look, so I'm not going to say that the current architecture for patents and intellectual property is perfect, right? There are deficiencies in it. There are ways we can change it. The TRIPS agreement was designed to make sure that such flexibilities exist. But at the same time, we have to recognize what are we trying to achieve here? Like Jono said, I mean, if our core goal is to have maximum vaccine production capacity in a short period of time, and that short period of time is in the next 6 months, then we have to ask the question, are there alternative pathways than just focusing on a patent waiver? And an alternative pathway, which is very clear, proven and established, is the idea of voluntary licensing. That's how Serum is currently making AstraZeneca's vaccine. That's how Biological E is going to be making Johnson & Johnson or Janssen's vaccine, and in the future, a vaccine partnership with Baylor. So those are arrangements which have happened in short spans of time, like 6-7 months, and we could do more of those very quickly, and they preserve the two things that we're trying to achieve here. On one side, we want to ensure that the incentives for innovation are in place, and once again, I'm saying that there are things that need to change in how the IP regime works, but we keep those incentives in place, don't disrupt that system too much in the middle of a pandemic, and get what we want, which is quicker, faster scale up of manufacturing capacity to a diverse set of vaccines, not just the two that India is currently using, for example, getting access to another few types of vaccines. And I think that goal is met by using as many pathways as we can, and in which I would not even put the patent waiver pathway to be the mainstream or the front and center, because it will take much longer to realize any benefits coming out of it the big companies in India who have the capacity to do biologics or vaccine manufacturing, such as Serum or Biologically or Bharat Biotech, are already, or Dr. Reddy's, they are already committed to manufacturing a vaccine based on a voluntary license they have received. So if the patent waiver happens, our question will be, who will start manufacturing it? Who has the sites ready? Definitely what we call as the tier 1 maturity companies, companies who have an established vaccine for which they have in the past obtained a WHO license or a pre-qualification. They're already manufacturing one or another of the existing vaccines. So the only ones that will perhaps try with the patent waiver would be the ones who've never done a WHO pre-qualified vaccine. And then it's only a guesswork in terms of how long will it take for them to start getting the process consistency, the GMP status, all of the things that we care about in terms of safety, efficacy, and quality of a vaccine. So I think it's important to keep in mind that for a longer time horizon, for getting ready for the next pandemic, it can be useful to have more distributed manufacturing capacity, and the patent and IP waiver or clauses like that should be designed to enable that for the future. But to manage the current pandemic and to get enough vaccine supply for this year, we have to think differently, and the quickest path will be if the companies who have developed the vaccine and have mastered the process, have run batches after batches, have made them consistent, they know every parameter, how much oxygen, how much stirring rate, what pressure, what temperature, they can come and say, we'll help you set it up, or we'll share all of our learning curve. And that's the fastest way to do it. And we've got to do that in addition to expending energies in getting the proposal through and through the complex navigational dynamics at the World Trade Organization.
Sure, Dr. Quick, it's not either or. I mean, we are in a situation where we need everything. Just wanted to get your comments on, say, India and South Africa, what they've been trying to do since October last year, and it's only now that it's got some modicum of support. It's not just vaccines, right? It's drugs, it's other equipment, it's diagnostic tools. That is something that's not really being touched now. Am I correct in that? And how important is that as another factor in dealing with the situation, Dr. Quick?
Well, all of those are really important, and I think the Rockefeller Foundation has been a partner with India for many years, and one of the core goals is India's self-sufficiency in responding to health crises. So I think, and we've actually worked with the Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms to help India increase the number of domestic producers of test kits. So it went from 2 last April to 22 by November, and because those are a product for which innovation is there are many more opportunities for innovation there, and so we patents, to a very, very large extent, patents have not inhibited an explosion of innovation and testing. The challenge has been, because we maintain with the Arizona State the COVID testings commons. There are 2,000 different tests that have been developed around the world. The problem is sorting out the ones that are reliable and from those that aren't, and they vary greatly. So I think in those other areas of innovation, absolutely, and independence, self-sufficiency for countries like India and South Africa and others who have the capacity, that's a critical goal. But in general, intellectual property has not slowed those opportunities.
Prashant Yadav, if you want to take that, and why have South Africa and India been pushing these measures so much at the WTO?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to go back to the history and the genesis of TRIPS.
Is it going to HIV and AIDS?
Yeah, so it starts from HIV and AIDS, and I think Indian companies have done extraordinary service and contribution to the field of HIV/AIDS through the work they've done in making generic versions of antiretrovirals, and that has enabled millions of people around the world to get access to antiretrovirals. So I think that's where the idea starts, and South Africa has in a way been a beneficiary of receiving Indian generic antiretrovirals at affordable prices. That's the genesis, but I think we also have to understand the differences, which means, one, the timeline is very compressed. Two, HIV medicines were mostly oral, solid, small molecule products, where if you have the recipe, your ability to reverse engineer and manufacture them is much higher. Just looking at the details of how a batch was made, you can go back and start making it. Yes, you still have to iterate, but the number of iterations required is probably lesser. Vaccine, especially the newer platform vaccines that have come out during COVID, are far more complex molecules, and just knowing the recipe isn't going to be sufficient. So I think India and South Africa's proposal was salient to say, yes, we need to explore all mechanisms in order to get access to technology, and in case IP becomes a barrier, let's get that out of the way. But I feel at this point, we haven't seen any place where IP has become a barrier. So let's take the example of remdesivir, the product from Gilead, which they licensed to 6 Indian companies last year. And while there is still a shortage of remdesivir in India at this moment, you have to ask the question, the 7 companies that are making it, the 6 companies that are making it, if they were to expand their own production capacity, would that be a better way to organize a remdesivir market, or making it completely free so that there are 50 companies making remdesivir, which will create to a very long tail, smaller companies all trying to make remdesivir with questionable quality. And most importantly, when a market becomes very fragmented and has 20 plus suppliers, then the ability to match demand and supply becomes compromised. If you have 5 big suppliers and those big suppliers say, we are committing to making 1 million vials, or however much they commit to 10 million vials a month, that is a better way to organize the market. So I think it's a constant reminder that having more suppliers, having more than 10 isn't going to be the best outcome. I think having a few, again, more than 1, more than 2, more than 3, but having a few is probably going to be the better way to match demand and supply when there is supply scarcity, when there is demand, which is very fluid and constantly evolving.
Right. You're saying it should be front and center. Dr. Quick, in terms of what Big Pharma and its usual argument, at least for lay people like us, which is about profits when so much money is being put in for R&D. Ashish Kumar, one of our viewers, asked this question. Global leaders can work out a way to compensate patent holding companies so they can come out and offer their technology. Do you agree? He also has another point, which is the WHO, the World Bank, and other financial institutions can compensate losses of the innovator company in terms of a patent waiver. I know Professor Yadav was saying this is not front and center. There are other issues as well. But when we talk about patent waivers, are these realistic, Dr. Quick?
Well, there are a variety of mechanisms that are potential mechanisms for creating incentives and for the research-based pharmaceutical industry to share their innovations. And again, the point that it's not just the recipe for the current vaccine. It's an ongoing relationship where we have to be ready to adapt these vaccines. And so that's why having a good working relation between the originator and other companies, I mean, you can create incentives, as your colleague, as the viewers suggested. Those are some of the incentives that could be created. But the key thing is an ongoing relation between the originator and the producer. So vaccines can be adapted with new variants as we get vaccine, if we get mutations that allow the virus to escape the vaccine. The originator and the new producer in India or South Africa or wherever can make the adjustments. They can also share information about safety issues. We've learned from the experience with the both AstraZeneca and with the J&J vaccine that the way we communicate about potential side effects is critical. So again, working together will get us farther faster.
Working together, Dr. Yadav, that is one of the fears. If you don't adapt the vaccines as we go down the line to possible mutations, which these vaccines so far, touch wood, have been working with, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think there again, if we think about the modality of voluntary licensing and manufacturing partnerships, it gets us farther, right? So if, for example, in October of 2021, if AstraZeneca comes up with an adapted version of their vaccine, whether you call it a booster dose or you call it a completely new variant matched vaccine, Serum will have access to that right away. They don't have to go out and do additional clinical trials. There is a larger company which is then conducting the trials for a variant matched vaccine. But if it was only based on a patent waiver without the originator company willingly transferring its technical know-how, if they were unwilling and it was a waiver-driven way of manufacturing, then the company which is manufacturing would have to go out and do its own research to create a variant matched version, which at this point can be both time and resource intensive. If every company that is making it tries to do it itself, one, there is no capability sometimes, but the other is that the time and resources then get too split amongst multiple companies. So I think, but back to your question of, is it about, how much revenue, profit, and other things are attached to it? So I think, yes, the companies who have developed promising new technology are indeed reaping the benefits of developing a promising new technology. And I think it's only fair that people who work on that get those benefits, as long as we don't deny anybody access to that technology because they are only focused on profit. So I think that's the distinction between, is profit an okay motive, or does profit come in the way of enabling access and equity in a bigger sense? So I think if we can find tools which allow both, I think that's our best bet. At the same time, I think the COVID vaccines are also a good source of revenue for generic manufacturing companies, those who have received licenses without having to undertake much of a risk. I mean, they have undertaken a risk in setting up a new manufacturing plant and doing some process work on it. But at the same time, being a recipient of technology transfer and then being able to make billions of doses, even though the margins are smaller, it's a good revenue stream. So I think we have to keep that in mind as well.
Dr. Quick, the US position now, USTR and the Biden administration, there is a group of analysts who look at it skeptically, that this change, if you can call it a change of the US position in terms of patent waivers allowed during a pandemic, possibly, is more optics, because America knows that one, it may take too long to actually happen, and two, it may never happen because just one country out of those 164 need to object at the WTO because it has to work on consensus. Dr. Quick?
Well, I've learned never to try to figure out why people are doing things. So yeah. I think the key thing is we need to step back and say, what is the goal here? And from Rockefeller Foundation's point, strong belief is that our shared goal must be to get at least 70% of the planet immunized by the end of 2022. And I think working together for that goal is going to get us there farther faster. And even if those waivers, even if waivers bring in, as Prashant says, more providers, we still have this whole chain of reagents and a variety of other issues. And I think that right now, those are actually beginning to get in the way of mobilizing the capacity that we already have. So I think that really needs to be the focus of our discussion, is practically what are the things that would most quickly and reliably provide the vaccines we need. And yeah, I mean, I think that's where we need to focus our attention.
Right. Professor Yadav, I mean, you've written about 4 tactics that are needed. What's really stopping, especially, countries like India when we're going through what we're going through at this point?
Yeah, so firstly, I think governments need to be very clear and precise about how they can support vaccine manufacturers to enhance manufacturing capacity. And I mean, the US is an example in this regard. Whatever a vaccine manufacturing company needs, whether it is material, money, resources, staff, scientific knowledge, the government and the Operation Warp Speed program was ready to provide them all of those inputs. So I think that's the kind of effort that is required to enhance manufacturing capacity. Whatever are the needs of the manufacturers, and they know them well, and they are oftentimes communicate them quite clearly and articulately to the government as well. So one is that's the nature of government support. The second is we have to diversify the portfolio of vaccines that are available for use in India's COVID vaccination program, and that would mean having access to newer technologies. Some of them could be manufactured in India with a technology transfer and a voluntary licensing scheme like what we've seen with AstraZeneca Serum Institute, or some could be just imported doses that are manufactured in other locations. So I think that diversification in manufacturing, other doses coming in, is one thing needed. And I think in our recent article in Harvard Business Review, we highlight that sometimes just money and how it flows impacts things. So when money is given only as an advance purchase agreement will pay you when you deliver, that may not always manage a manufacturer's risk-return trade-off appropriately. But instead, if the money is given as here is money, advance payment, make sure you set up enough capacity, that has a slightly different incentive structure for a manufacturer. Similarly, information about what will be the future demand, because a manufacturer who's setting up a new plant, a completely new production suite in an existing site, such as some of the big companies in India, they have to ask the question, is this only for the next year or 2 years? Or is this demand going to stay with us for the next 5 years? Right? So information to make things clearer as to what is the future state. And again, acknowledging that much of this is science that is evolving and we don't know the answers. But to the extent that we know, we should try and make that easier for the manufacturers.
We don't know the answers. I'm just going to get Dr. Quick out on a limb. Your book, Dr. Quick and Shai, they asked this question. I know it's a very broad-stroked question. Any timeline when this pandemic will end? A fresh outburst and mutant viruses are causing anxiety and mental health issues. How do we prepare to end this? This is what you have been dealing with in your book.
Yes, and just to say, it is actually available in the South Asian 2020 edition from Amaryllis, an imprint of Majul. So it is available locally there. So there are several key things. I mean, looking back at the last century pandemics, local disease outbreaks, new viruses are going to happen. The difference between a local outbreak and a boiled over catastrophic pandemic is more often than not human action or inaction. So key things is we need to invest now and invest enough to be sure these technologies are ready to scale up in a pandemic. We need leadership who understands pandemics, leadership at all levels, pandemic literacy, so that that readiness to take action is there. And we need to make sure that the science is happening in the sort of peacetime between pandemics. We're not going to stop every outbreak, but we certainly can make the world dramatically safer from these catastrophic pandemics. And so leadership, investment, science, those are critical ingredients.
Professor Yadav, the world and India, especially at this moment, is dealing with this one. But that's the point. I mean, do we only deal with crises when we reach there and when there's an emergency in a hospital, or do you prepare for it?
So we've got to prepare for it. I mean, it's what we call the cycle of panic and neglect, or panic and complacency. And we are at risk we're on the peak of panic right now. We're at risk of descending into the valley of complacency unless we have mobilized citizens who keep their leaders on track. Political leaders and business leaders are subject to the economics and politics of now. They respond to what's really happening. Voters don't reward political leaders for prevention, but they hammer them for what was seen as a preventable disaster. But I think it's on us as citizens, as professionals at all, to make sure we keep the bell ringing loudly between the pandemics. I would love to see pandemic survivors. We know from AIDS that people have a personal stake. Those AIDS activists were what drove the kinds of changes that we referred to, that gave us the medicines we have. And we need a real strong coalition of, for example, COVID survivors who are in a position in life where they can say, look, never again, and really mobilize a continuing movement. And then do annual in the U.S., September's Prevention Month. Do annual awareness. Do some of these exercises. Get the vaccine manufacturers, for example, to get together and say, okay, we only have so much capacity when there's a pandemic. How do we decide which vaccines to stop producing so we can start producing pandemic vaccines? So there are a number of things we can do in the, quote, peacetime between outbreaks. But it involves enough of us, of citizens, of professionals, really keeping that bell ringing.
Professor Yadav,
two things. I will add to that two things. One is that the question of when will this pandemic end? I mean, again, it's very hard to find answers to this, but I think if we look at the United States, Israel, countries which have achieved very high rates of vaccination coverage with the right types of vaccines, that's what gives us hope. So I think the answer is whenever we can achieve very high degree of vaccination coverage everywhere globally, that's when the pandemic truly ends. And how long will it take us? Depends upon manufacturing capacity, delivery capacity, political commitment, our societal commitment to equity in vaccine access and things like that. But to Jono's point on what does it take for us to not only just think about the question of when does this pandemic end, but how do we make this to be the last pandemic? How do we make sure that there isn't other pandemics in the future and they are at more localized outbreaks which can be contained quickly? I think there is a question of largely politics. I think the science and the engineers and the supply people have got the right solutions. I think the challenge is that the constituents who have to vote to elect their political leaders have to understand that investments in health and preparedness pay a long dividend. And it's sometimes hard because when there are population groups who are not even getting proper health care for their current needs, if the small budget is then allocated for something which is a low likelihood future event, people say, no, I don't necessarily think that's the best way to allocate scarce health resources. But I think this one has been a somber reminder in that sense that, yes, even though healthcare resources are scarce, especially in low and middle income countries, we still need to allocate a portion of them to preparedness. And preparedness will mean we will have to keep some assets idle. Some things will just be waiting. They won't be as used during the during the peacetime, as people have started calling it. But that's something we have to learn to accept as society. And the second part is that we need a better job at making everybody understand what an exponential curve means, whether it means bringing leaders and population groups into a math classroom, so be it. Because exponential curve tells us when you are in the peak of the exponential curve, there is very little you can do at that time. But the signs of when you are starting to enter the exponential part of the curve start showing up many weeks beforehand. And that's the time to react. And that's the time to do more intensive, both pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical interventions to prevent getting to the next stage. And I think that's where we need to do some more reflections and collective thinking.
Professor Prashant Yadav, thank you. I really appreciate your experience, your expertise, and your time. Thanks for joining us on StratNews Global. And as one of our viewers, Shai Desi says, terrific panelists and, of course, a very hot topic. Thanks, Professor Yadav, as well as Dr. Jonathan Quick, for your time.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Good to be here.
Pleasure was ours. A reminder to our viewers, if you like videos like this one, you can help support our kind of journalism on our website. Do also follow our social media handles on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram to get the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective, and click on that bell icon and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you get notified when we put up videos like this one. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.